Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to today's Daf Yomi, which is Yevamos Daf Vav. We are actually on top of the Amud, but perhaps let's backtrack. Let's go back to Hamud Beis, to the beginning of this step in the Gemara. So let's go back to 7 lines from the bottom of the Amud. We're in the midst of the discussion regarding the sugya of asay deichei lo asay. Yesterday, we've already established, we've concluded that we found the makar, the source for this concept, that when we're faced with a conflicting situation, an asay versus a lo asay, we go ahead with the mitzvah, the asay, which the Ramban says represents Avas Hashem, overrides the lo asay, which represents Yiras Hashem. Ava surpasses Yira. Okay, that's a given. What if the lo asay is a very severe type of lo asay? It has a chorus involved. How about that case? Shouldn't a asay be deicha that? We don't yet have a makar. We have no reason to believe it does, and therefore we have a kasha. What's the kasha? Because back on Af Gimel Beis, the Gemara told us the reason for the halacha found in the Mishnah, that if the Yevama happens to be an erva, so his brother, his deceased brother, his childless brother's widow happens to be an erva as well, surviving brother's daughter, mother-in-law, etc., there is no yibum in this case. Why not? Maybe yibum should override the isser of arayis. No, we have a pasuk, a drasha based on the word aleha, to tell you even in the case of yibum, where it says aleha, yivama, yavay aleha, there is no mitzvah. In a circumstance where it involves a yivama who is a kroiva, an erva, to the yavam. Question was, why do you need a pasuk? Why would I think? Why would I even entertain the notion that yibum can override a issa of arayis? I'd like to say that it has chorus. And if that's the case, why do I even need a pasuk to indicate that there is no yibum in this type of scenario? Why would I think there would be? So basically, we're on a search to find a possible makar that indeed an asay has the ability to be deichei asay even with chorus. And if that's a given, then we understand why we need a pasuk. Itzrich, we need a pasuk of Allah, that drasha, to tell you that by Yibam we don't allow this type of formula, we don't apply this concept, and Yibam will not be applicable in the case of an error. But again, that's only based on a premise that typically an asay is deichei asay with chorus. Why would you say so? Ella Istrich says, we need the drasha by Yibam because the default assumption is an asay typically can push aside a lo asay even with chorus. Perhaps I would say, we can learn from the halacha we find by kibud avim, where we find that an asay can push aside a lo asay with chorus. It would allow even a malacha on Shabbos, which has chorus. The Sanya, Yachol Yehi Kibud Av Eim Deicha Shabbos. Perhaps the mitzvah of Kibud Av can push away Shabbos. His father tells him to cook for him on Shabbos. Perhaps that's allowed, despite the fact that Shabbos has chorus, because Essay is Deicha Lo Essay with chorus. The answer is no. In this case, we don't allow it because your father is also obligated. He also has a chiyuv of Shmir Shabbos. Just because he's asking you to do something for him doesn't justify Chilul Shabbos. Okay, so it's a specific limitation by Kibud Av Eim, but not to say that typically an asay can override a lo asay with chorus. So in this case, we don't allow it. And next to it, it says, keep Shabbos. This indicates that Kulchem Chayavim B'chvoidi, notwithstanding Kibud Av Eim, your father himself is Chayiv in Kavod of Hashem, keeping the mitzvahs. So in this case, we don't allow it, because it's a personal chiyuv to your father, who himself has a chiyuv to Hashem. But typically, if a person is faced with a circumstance that presents him with conflicting elements, asay versus lo asay, perhaps the asay overrides lo asay, even when there's chorus. My love, we're not assuming we're speaking about a malacha that is asking you to do the amalei shachoitli, basheli, do these malachas on Shabbos, V'tam the kasav rachmana es shab soisai tishmeru. The reason why you don't listen is because we have this pasuk. When it comes to Shabbos, your father can't have a say in the matter. Halav hachidachi, but otherwise, if it's a standard, a typical, a say nothing to do with father or kibbutz v'aim, the assay overrides. Lav de machamer, we're speaking about a non-malacha issue. Father's asking him to lead a loaded donkey on Shabbos, which involves a lav. It's not a karetz. So you have no indication whatsoever that there is room to think that an asay should override a lois asay with karetz. We're not speaking about karetz. Asks the Gemara, what do you mean? If that's the case, you're telling me that his father's merely asking him to do a isser lav, and still we don't allow it. The asay will not push away a simple lav. But we know that for a fact that an asay can shove aside, can be doich, a typical lois asay. 1 second. Why don't we learn right from here? From kibbutz v'aim, that it doesn't work. An asay cannot override a simple, a standard, typical lois asay. So this negates the entire concept that esed echel asay. Okay, v'chitei meshani lavi de Shabbos de chamira. Perhaps you'll tell me here it's different because a law pertaining to Shabbos, which is that opportunity to testify about Hashem's oneness, Hashem being the source of creation, the source of all existence. Perhaps that's more chamer. We know a person keeps Shabbos. It's as though he's moed in the entire Torah. If he rejects Shabbos, he, like Oved Avodah rejects Hashem's existence. So Shabbos stands higher, and therefore, by Shabbos we can't allow the asay to override. But typically, yes. Really, you're going to make that distinction? We don't find that distinction made elsewhere. About Tana Ba'al Makai, we find a Tana elsewhere who compares other mitzvahs to Shabbos. But like Baruch, he doesn't draw that line, doesn't make that distinction. The Sanya, Yachal Amar Le'avav Hitami. So Cain's father is standing with him near a Beis HaKvaros. The father says, you see that lost donkey? I want you to go into the Beis HaKvaros, become tummy, and return that lost donkey. I have an interest in you returning that donkey to my neighbor. So he's really telling him to do a lav, to become tummy. Or there's a donkey roaming around the street. Mitzvah Shabbos Aveda presents itself to the son. The father says, you know what? I want you to come help me. Abandon the Aveda. So in effect, he's telling him to do an Avera. To be over on Loisuchal is Salam, which is not, a person not meant to ignore his friend's Aveda. These are cases of Asay versus Lois Asay. Mitzvah's kibbutz v'aim versus the lav of Tumah, lav of Loisuchal is Salim, of Hashavas Aveda. Some Rishonim learn that we're speaking where the father has an interest, right? An interest in the son doing the lav. He has some personal benefit from it, but otherwise, there would be no room to even think of mitzvahs kibbutz v'aim in this case, because kibbutz v'aim means to serve one's parents, to benefit them. But if he has no personal benefit, just telling you to do something that isn't considered kibbutz v'aim, other Rishonim learn, other Mefarshim learn, that there is an element, even in this case, there's an element of kibbutz v'aim, but it's not on the same level as actually serving one's parent, benefiting one's parent, which would justify being over lois asay. So when the Gemara suggests that the father can ask his son to be over lav on his behalf, and we're going to need a pasuk to undo that notion, apparently we're speaking with a father who's actually benefiting from this maaseh. And therefore, Yochal Yishmalei, perhaps the son should listen to his father in this case. Kibbutz Av is doicha the lois asay Talmud no. The same pasuk we had before. Ish imu v'avitiro. As important as kibbutz v'aim is, fear of one's parents is not on the same level as fear of Hashem. You're meant to maintain Shabbos. Kulchem chayavim b'chvoid. Even your parents have an obligation to fear Hashem, to honor Hashem, to do Hashem's mitzvahs. A parent can't come along and negate Hashem's mitzvahs. 1 second. What is the pasuk speaking about? Shabbos. There's Shabbos soisati shmeiru. Maintain Shabbos, even in the face of kibbutz v'aim. Fine. But Hashavas Aveda, Tumas Kohen, how do you compare it to Shabbos? Shabbos perhaps stands higher. Apparently, we don't make that distinction. It's all one and the same. The obligation to honor one's parent doesn't override a mitzvah, period. So it's pretty clear from this price that we don't make that chiluk between Shabbos and other mitzvahs. If that's the case, let's backtrack a second. We had a brisa where we don't listen to a parent when it comes to doing a malacha on Shabbos. She was suggesting that perhaps we were discussing lav de mechamer, the law pertaining to leading along a loaded donkey. It's a simple lav without kares. Kasha was. So why don't you listen to your father? Apparently an asay does not override a lois asay. Okay, so then that negates the entire concept, the entire principle of asay deicha lois asay. And we know that's a given fact, that asay deicha lois asay. And you can't say Shabbos is most severe, and that's why it doesn't work here, but otherwise asay deicha lois asay, we don't find a distinction between Shabbos and other mitzvahs. So back to the question. Doesn't this brisa of Kibbutz of Aim not negating lav de mechamer provide a precedent that asay cannot override a lois asay? That's a problem. Apparently we're not speaking about a regular lois asay. That's why it doesn't override. We're speaking about a malacha. He's telling his son, shachoit li basheli. And that's why he can't do it. And that's why he can't listen to his father. Because the asay is just a regular asay, and the lois asay has kares. So that's what the brisa is speaking about. So again, Kibbutz Avim does not justify doing any avera. Whether it's a lav of Shabbos, lav pertaining to Shabbos Haveda, a lav pertaining to a kohen becoming tamei. Because parents is chayiv and covered Hashem as well. They can't negate a mitzvah. Okay, that's a given. But let's focus on that first price. Price expressed the halacha regarding Shabbos specifically. Don't listen to a father who tells you to do a malach. Why? Because we have a pasuk that doesn't allow you to listen to him. Now, why do we need a pasuk? This is a clear indication that otherwise, if this father-mother factor, this personal factor was not present, this fact that they are chayiv and covered Hashem, and therefore they can't tell you to negate a lav, if that wasn't present, you're walking along the street, you're faced with a choice, you're faced with a conflict. I have a case where I'm faced with a choice, asay or lois asay, and the asay over conflicts with the lois asay, and the lois asay contains kares, such as by Yibum. There's no personal factor there. Nobody telling me to do it. It wasn't introduced by a father or mother. It's a situation, it's a circumstance presented by Hashem. Apparently in that case, the asay does override lois asay, even with kares. Only by parents it doesn't work, but otherwise it would. Here's our raya. This is a raya that asay negates a lois asay even with kares. Says the Gemara, not so fast. Ella, fine, you're right. We were speaking about the father telling him to do malacha, and only a father can't tell a son to do malacha. But typically an asay overrides a lois asay with kares. But still there's no raya from here to elsewhere. No raya from here to Yibum. You know why? There's a way to reject, to challenge this raya. You see, when a father asks his son, shech the animal from Yan Shabbos, cook the cholent from Yan Shabbos, that's hechsher mitzvah. There's no other way to do it. Right? So perhaps in this case, I would think you're allowed to do it, to accommodate the father. The chiddush is no. Right? But that's only because it's a father telling you, but otherwise, an asay perhaps would allow you to override even a lois asay with kares. When it's hechsher mitzvah, when there's only one way of fulfilling that asay, by doing this malacha, by doing this isur. But yibum, there are plenty of other ways to be mekayim the mitzvah. Do chalitza. Nobody asks you to be miyavim the erva. There's an easy alternative. Who's to say that in this case, the asay will justify overriding and negating and transgressing the lois asay with kares? So back to square one. So what's your basis? What's your basis for that notion that an essay of Yibum can override Isser Erva with Karis? Elo says the Gemara, Tzakadaitach, Amina, perhaps I would say, we have another makar, another possible source, that an assay is Doiche Elisha say with Karis. Teisim Binim Beis Hamidash, we're going to learn from the mitzvahs Binim Beis Hamidash. The Sanya, Yochel Yeh Binim Beis Hamidash Deicha Shabbos, perhaps building the Midrash, which is an assay, overrides Shabbos. It allows you to do malachas on Shabbos. An assay is Doiche Elisha say with Karis. Tamaloymar, no. Eshab, so he said to Shmoyru Migdashi Tiro. Pasuk speaks about Shabbos in close proximity to Migdash to tell you, keep it in context. Kulcham chayavim b'chvoide. You and the Migdash are meant to honor me. Mitzvah Migdash. Binim Beis Hamikdash doesn't justify Chilul Shabbos. Here we go. Apparently, typically, Asay is Deichel, let's say with Karis. So Migdash not, but otherwise, yeah. My love, apparently we're speaking about doing a real malacha, building and demolishing, which is a malacha on Shabbos with Karis. The reason why in this case it doesn't override Shabbos, because of the pasuk, a special pasuk, a local pasuk. But otherwise, in a typical case, such as Yibum, an Asay pushes aside a say with Karis. Law used to say we're speaking about a malachi with Karis. Love the Machamer, we're speaking about leading a loaded donkey in preparation of the bringing the materials to the Beis Hamikdash. That's all. So sure, Asay would be Deichi, a plain lav, not for the pasuk telling you otherwise, but typically Kula Asay is Deichi. Asay, that's a known fact, but not with a Kares. Can't take it to that point. You have no right to that. Says, okay, so you're telling me that we're speaking about Asay, at least Asay of Machamer, and even so you can't do that? Meaning, the Asay of Binyan Migdash won't justify doing a plain lav? That negates the entire concept that we're learning the whole last few dafim. Well, the Kaimlan, we have known fact, the Kabbalah, the Asay, the Asay can push aside the regular Asay. Let's learn from Binyan Migdash that it's not so. An Asay can't even set aside, push aside a regular Asay. Perhaps you'll say, this is basically a repeat of the previous sugya, the same steps. Perhaps you'll say, Shani Lavi de Shabbos de Chamira. Here it's different because it's Shabbos, that's why it doesn't work, but typically an Asay pushes aside. Let's say about Tana Ba'al Makoyu like a Paruch. We'll find a Tana discussing other mitzvahs and connects it. Has no problem connecting to the Shabbos and doesn't draw that distinction between Shabbos and the rest. Asani Yochal Amar Lo Aviv Tamei. Perhaps the father instructs his son to become Tamei. A kohen at the Beis HaKvaros, Ish Amar Lo Al Tachsa, or he tells him, ignore the Aveda, Yochal Yishmalei. Perhaps in this case you listen to father at the expense of the lav, Tamaloima Ish Imav Avtirov, V'gaimer, that the father factor doesn't override any Averis. Kulcham Chayav Mechvoid, even your father is meant to keep the Torah. And the Bryce is pretty much comparing other Isurim to Isur of Shabbos, which is the subject of this pasuk that the Bryce is quoting. Apparently there's no distinction, we're not machalik. And if that's the case, we have a kasha on our hands. Because you're telling me that by the Beis Hamikdash, the obedience of the Beis Hamikdash, the Asay does not allow you to even do a plain lav. Even lav de Mechamer, which pretty much tells you that an Asay is not leichel lois Asay. And that contravenes the accepted halacha, that it's not so. Asay is leichel lois Asay. So it must be that when we speak about Binyan Beis Hamikdash, we're speaking about a true malacha, building, demolishing, which involves kares. And the reason why we don't allow that for Binyan Beis Hamikdash is because we have a pasuk, Kulcham Chayav Mechvaydi, but otherwise, we have no problem allowing an Asay to override a relationship with kares. Here's a precedent, here's your makar, here's a source that indeed an Asay is doich a relationship with kares. Says Gemara, no, Ella Mishum Dikla Mifrach. You're right, we're speaking about a malacha, but still there's no right. We can say a big difference between Binyan Beis Hamikdash and Yibum. The same teretz we had before. Ma lahanach shekenech mitzvah. In both these instances, in the case where a father asks his son to cook for him on Shabbos, in the case where you're building the Beis Hamikdash, that's hechsher mitzvah. There's only one way to do that mitzvah. As opposed to Yibum, you have an easy alternative. Chalitza. Who's to say you're allowed to do Yibum when you have an easy alternative? So basically, you no longer have a basis for that notion that Yibam would be doicha the Isra Arayis. Herrshem mitzvah? What do you mean? To tell me that in a case where this act is needed for the mitzvah, it overrides a lav with kares, right? That's the point of these two. That's the point of this pasuk by Beis Hamikdash. Only the bini Beis Hamikdash, since it involves the Mikdash, which is chayiv b'chvod, you can't justify a malacha. But typically, if it's hechsher mitzvah, it's something which you're doing because that's the only way to fulfill the mitzvah. The essay can override a relationship with kares. Is that the point of this pasuk? Hechsher mitzvah tegel lemihosam. That is already known from that first price of kibbutz v'aim. We've already proven that point. Why the repeat? Enochanami, you're right. Says the Gemara, you're right. Actually, the pasuk of Beis Hamikdash is not coming to tell you anything regarding our sugya, regarding the ability of an essay to override a less essay. So what then is that pasuk coming to tell you? Es Mikdashi Tiro, next to Es Shabsoisei Tishmoiru, is telling you as follows. Something pertaining to the halachos of the Beis Hamikdash. What's the point of that pasuk? Connecting Mikdash to Shabbos, it's needed for the following halacha d'sanya. Perhaps one should have fear from the edifice, from the Beis Hamikdash itself. Consider it an end on it, a powerful entity. Making it a Zara. Answer is no. Talmud Leimar. Pasuk says, we connect one to the other. The term Shmira applies to Shabbos. The term Moira applies to the Mikdash. And we connect. Shmira Hamura b'Shabbos. Just like a Shmira with Shabbos is referring to what? You're afraid of the Shabbos? Not afraid of Shabbos. Rather, the fear pertains to the one who commanded, the one who instructed, Hashem. Likewise, Moira pertaining to Mikdash, the fear doesn't pertain directly to the building. Rather pertains to Hashem, who rests in the Mikdash, who instructed us to build that Mikdash. Is that the point of the pasuk? To place the yira into context, directed to Hashem, rather than to the building itself. So how does one fulfill this directive? How does one express Moira Mikdash? Ve'ezahi Moira Mikdash. One should not enter the Harabayis proper with his staff, with his shoes, with his money belt, dust on his feet. Nor should he turn the Beis Hamikdash into a shortcut. Urukika and spitting there? Surely not. Of course not. Rashi says Kal V'chaim is based on a pasuk in Megillas Esther. Mordechai says, look, I can't come wearing these the sackcloth. Ein lova elashara melech b'levush sak. And we learn from there, look, a sack is not repulsive, it's just not too elegant, but it's not repulsive, and that is not meant to be brought to a makam of a melech. Kal v'chomer, certainly spitting is something which is mois, and one should refrain from doing that before Hashem. The Brisa continues. Perhaps it's only when the Mikdash is standing. What about nowadays? How do we know that we maintain that same deference to the Beis Hamikdash? Talmud Loimar, once again, that connection between Mikdash and Shabbos. We connect the two. Just as Shmira pertains to Shabbos is forever. Likewise, Moira to Mikdash is ongoing. The bottom line is, we lost our raya. That Asay has the ability to push aside a loisasei with kares. At most, it will do so in a case of hechsher mitzvah. Like in the case of kibbutz v'aim, where he's telling him to cook for him, which is the only way. The malach is the only way to bring about, to fulfill that wish. As opposed to Yibam, we have an easy alternative. Be chaylitz instead of being miyabim. Who's to say that Yibam justifies? being over the Isra Arayas. So that takes us back to our question. So why are you working with the assumption that Yibum would come along and push aside the Isra Arayas, which was really the reason why you needed a pasuk to tell you otherwise? Skip the pasuk. I wouldn't even think that it would work this way. I wouldn't even suggest that Yibum is stronger than Isra Arayas. So bottom line is we're still looking for a makar that indeed a say is doiche eloisha say with karis. Ella rather, here comes another right. Sal kedai techamina. If not for the pasuk aleh, which disqualifies an error from Yibum, I would think Yibum does apply even in that case. Why? Teisi ma'avara, I'm going to learn from lighting a fire on Shabbos. The Tana Dvei Rabbi Shmuel. Lo yisavaru eish b'chol mashvei seichem. Maltam alayim. What's the point of the pasuk? Don't light a fire on Shabbos. Don't we already know that we don't do all malachas on Shabbos? What do you mean, matam alayim? Matam alayim? What do you mean, what's the point? There's a specific lesson and message contained in this pasuk. Either Rabbi Yossi, according to Rabbi Yossi, Lulav is coming to tell you that burning on Shabbos is different than the other malachas, which have karas and chatas. Burning is lighter, and it only has a lav. So that's why the Torah singled it out. Or either Rav Nassim L'chalik, according to Rav Nassim, is coming to single out lighting to tell you that we divide the malachas. Each one is an independent entity. By being over any malacha, karas follows or chatas follows. You don't need to do all the malachas at once. That's the message that the Torah sends us by singling out, by separating le'savaru eish from the other malachas to tell you each malacha is separate and independent. So that's what the pasuk is coming to tell you. It's not an extra pasuk. There's a good purpose for it. The sanya, as we find in the Bryce. Have ora lav yatasa. According to Rabbi Yossi, the pasuk discussing the issue of lighting on Shabbos is informing us that lighting is just a lav. There's no karas, there's no chatas. It's coming to divide the malachis. So what did the Bryce mean to ask? Why does the pasuk say le'sevaro? There's a reason for it. Answers the Gemara of Amarava. Rava explained to us the Bryce. Tana, Moishavas Kakashali. He had a kasha regarding the choice of words found in the pasuk. Moishava is matamaloima. Why does the pasuk say loisavara ish bechol moishve seich in all your places of dwelling? What's the point of spelling that out? Matamaloima. Michti. Let's analyze this. Shabbos chayvus hagufi. The mitzvah of Shabbos is classified as a personal chayv. It's considered a personal chayva, not pertaining to land or to farming, and that's universal. V'chayvus haguf. No, yeheges bein ba'aretz, bein mechutz la'aretz. All personal chiyuvim apply anywhere. They're not limited to Eretz Yisrael, and therefore Meishavah is the kasser Rachmana b'Shabbos Lamid. Why does the Torah have to employ that term Meishavah is by Shabbos? An extra pasuk, an extra word. Answers the Gemara, Mishum Rabbi Shmuel Amar Talmud Echad. So there was a certain Talmud who quoted Rabbi Shmuel as follows. That's the answer to the question. The pasuk is trying to include something here. We have a pasuk pertaining to Misas Bezdin. Yechayiya Beish Chet Maves Chet Mishpat Maves V'Humas. So we find that in certain severe cases, Bezdin applies capital punishment. Shemani, perhaps I would think, it applies 7 days a week. Ben b'choil, whether during the weekdays, ben b'Shabbos, even on Shabbos, which essentially means they do malacha to bring about Misas Bezdin. For instance, when it comes to a burning streifa, they take a lead rod, they light it, they heat it up. So perhaps that's allowed. Umani mekayim. And what does the pasuk mean? Mechalel moisumas. Now, allowed to do malach on Shabbos. B'shar malachis. Chutz Misas Bezdin applies to other ordinary malachis outside of Bezdin. But Bezdin itself, they can do a misa even on Shabbos. Oh yeah, no, maybe perhaps we'll switch it around. Elafilu Misas Bezdin. The Yisra malach on Shabbos applies even to Bezdin as well. They can't do misa on Shabbos. Umani mekayim v'humas. How am I going to apply the pasuk? which speaks about Bezdin applying Misa B'chol during the week. They have Shabbos, not on Shabbos. Oh yeah, no, maybe perhaps we'll go switch tracks. Elafilu b'Shabbos. I think more later we'll go through the Shakla V'Tayr to explain all the steps. There are deeper meanings behind all these steps. There are arguments back and forth. This is just a brief synopsis of the arguments. Or maybe no, maybe even on Shabbos they can do Misas Bezdin. Basically, what you're saying is that Misas Bezdin is important enough and can be applied even on Shabbos. So that's the question. The answer is Talmud Leimar. That's what the Brisa was trying to tell us. Talmud Leimar le'sevaru eish b'chol moishvei sech. Torah tells you don't light a fire on Shabbos wherever you are. And the Torah uses the word moishvei sech to indicate something deeper, to indicate that it pertains to Bezdin. How does it pertain to Bezdin? Elsewhere we have a pasuk which speaks about a ritzeach who's chayav misa. V'hayu elu lachem l'chukas mishpat l'dorei seichem b'chol moishvei seichem. So the term Moishavitz pertains to Misas Bezdin. We make that connection. Ma Moishavitz. Hamurim lahalon bebezdin. Just as Moishavitz pertaining to that pasuk, it pertains to Bezdin, Misas Bezdin. Af Moishavitz. Hamurim kan bebezdin. Likewise, in the pasuk. Loisivaru eish bechol moishvaisechem b'yem HaShabbos. The term Moishavitz is alluding to Misas Bezdin. V'amar Achman loisivaru, and Torah is pretty much telling us, suspend it on Shabbos. Don't apply Misas Bezdin on Shabbos. Okay, that's the end of the Brisa. So now we have clarity as to what the Brisa had in mind. The kasha wasn't, why is there this pasuk? We know why the pasuk came about, to teach us halachis, lachalek, lab. But Mishavos, what's the point of Mishvei Seichem? It's Chobas Haguf. Shabbos is personal. What's the point of spelling out that it's meant to be fulfilled in all your places of dwelling? Of course, why would I think otherwise? The answer is Shabbos is referring to Misas Bezdin, and even that doesn't take place on Shabbos, which pretty much sounds like it indicates that there would have been room to think otherwise, right? That's what the Torah is dispelling that notion. It seems like the premise would have been, Misas Bezdin, the mitzvah say to put a transgressor to death is so important, stands so high that it can override even Eloisa say pertaining to Shabbos, which has malacha, which has kares. My love, Rabbi Nassan, aren't we speaking? Should we not assume that we're following Shittas Rabbi Nassan? Rabbi Nassan, the Amar Lachalek Yatzis. We just quoted Rabbi Nassan before. He holds that the reason why it says like Sevaru separately is to tell you that every malacha stands alone. Every malacha gets kares, including lighting a fire. It's like any other malacha. The time of the Kasir Rachman Sevaru. And the reason why we don't apply the einish of streif on Shabbos is because of the special pasuk. But otherwise, what would have been the default assumption? I would assume that it's Deiches Shabbos. Why? Because a mitzvah asay is Deiche, even with kares. Typically, it is Deich. Here it's not, but typically it is. So this is a clear raya. That's what we're looking for. We have a Mokkah that Asay pushes aside a Leisa even with kares. We're speaking according to Shittas Rabbi Yossi, who holds that lighting on Shabbos only entails a lav. There's no kares there, as we said before, and therefore, this I would think that lighting fire on Shabbos only a lav. That's overridden by the mitzvah Asay of Misas Bezdin, because Asay is Deicha regular Leisa Asay. Okay, so that's true. But a Leisa Asay with kares, who's to say that's going to be pushed aside by an Asay? Says the Gemara, okay, let's say it's Rabbi Yossi. Granted. We're following Rabbi Yossi, we're speaking about a simple lav. But stop for a second. What are we speaking about? Misas Bezdin, by way of burning. They don't just light, they cook. They heat up that lead rod. They soften it. It's a masa bishul. According to all shittas, that's a true malach on Shabbos, which has kares. So, what was Rabbi Yossi speaking about when he said that havara was singled out, was separated from the rest of the pack, from the rest of the malachas, and only has a lav? Havara great dust pertains to just lighting a fire, but Havara the Bezdin, when Bezdin lights this fire, Bishop Psilo, that's just making a fire, they're cooking up this lead rod. But Rav Sheshes already tells us, Mali Bishop Psila, Mashal Bishop Saman. What's the difference between cooking up, heating up this metal rod, or heating up ingredients in the paint dyeing process, the saman and the ingredients which they use to dye wool material. In any case, they're doing a real malacha of bishul. That's a malacha that involves kares, according to all shittas. And still, it seems we had the notion, we had the premise, we had the assumption, the running assumption that asay will push aside that type of lav with kares. Fine, we have a pasuk that undoes it. By Bezdin, we don't allow it. Fine. But that's a clear indication that otherwise we would assume it does. Otherwise, it indeed does. So typically, an asay is the echelez asay with kares. And that takes us back to Yibum. Back home, apparently, the default assumption would have been that Yibum can push aside an erva with kares, and that's why we need the pasuk aleh to dispel that notion. So we found our makkah. We found what we're looking for. No, not so fast. Omar of Simi Bar Ashi. No. No. That's not the formula the Tana is following. He wasn't coming from the from that direction at all. That wasn't his starting point. Perhaps an Asay could push aside Eloi Sasay, and that's why we need a pasuk that we don't allow it by Bezdin. No, that wasn't the starting point. Rather, he was coming from a kavachim, which served the basis for that notion. And this is how we learn the price. When is one warned against being mechal Shabbos? B'shar malachis, chutz misas bezdin, by ordinary malachis, out of bezdin. Aval misas bezdin, but bezdin is applying the capital punishment. Dach Shabbos mechal v'chayim, that can override Shabbos, not because it's misas say. Rather, it's based on a kavachim. Which kavachim? Ulma avoida sheichamura v'deicha Shabbos. Since we find that avoida in the Mikdash, karbanis stand very high. In fact, you do avoida even on Shabbos. You bring karbanis on Shabbos. So avoida overrides Shabbos. Still, we find that ritzicha deicha isa. If a kohen is guilty of ritzicha, he murders somebody, we pull him away. We don't allow him to do avoida. So applying misa to ritzeach is more important than doing karbanis in the Beis HaMikdash. Shenamar me'im mizbechi tichen alamas. Take him away. So it's ritzicha over avoida over Shabbos, right? Ritzicha gets in the way of avoida, which gets in the way of Shabbos. That's one side of the equation. Certainly Shabbos shenitches pnei avoida. Let's focus on Shabbos now, which is overridden by avoida. You do avoida on Shabbos, despite the fact that it entails malachis. So Shabbos is pretty much on the bottom of this pyramid. What would you say about Ritzicha? What do you say about Mrs. Bezdin vis-a-vis Shabbos? If Shabbos is all the way down below avoida, which is below Ritzicha, isn't it logical to think that the Mrs. Bezdin applied in a Ritzicha context to kill a murderer, that would be Deicha Shabbos? So that was the starting point of the Brisa, not because the mitzvah asay of Mrs. Bezdin overrides Shabbos. No, never. Who's to say that asay can push aside a lav with kares? No, that wasn't the starting point at all. It was based on a kavach chaimer. So that was the starting point. And now we're going to explain the shakla v'tari and the Brisa, the back and forth. The Brisa responds, Umay oyene, the kamer. So what's the Brisa responding? Maybe not. What did the Brisa have in mind? How do you challenge this rock solid kavachimer? There's a way to challenge it. The Brisa meant like this. You're working with the premise that Mrs. Bezdin, which is Deich Avoida, can be Deich Shabbos. I'll find you an example of something which is stronger than Avoida and can't be Deich Shabbos. So you see, it's not a bona fide proven formula. Hachikamar, Kvuras Meis Mitzvah, Techiach, burying an unattended maze. That's a right against you. Because on the one hand, Shadeichas Avoida, it pushes aside karbanis. Basically, it means that if a kohen encounters a meis mitzvah, he has to put aside his avoid the concerns and go become tamei. So meis mitzvah stands higher than avoida, but still, you can't bury somebody on Shabbos. So perhaps when it comes to Misas Bezin as well, sure, it's more prominent than avoida, but who says it's Deicha Shabbos? So that's the next step in the Bryce. Here comes the next step. Hadar Amar, the Bryce responds, well, I have something to answer. Perhaps your notion is wrong. Kvuras Meis can't be done on Shabbos. Maybe it is Deicha Shabbos as well, and therefore Mrs. Bezin will also be Deicha Shabbos. Kvuras Meis Mitzvah Tichtcha Shabbos Mikal V'Chaim. I'll find another way to prove that you can bury a Meis Mitzvah on Shabbos as well, and therefore our first Kal V'Chaim will hold true. This formula will hold true that something which is stronger than Avodah, which is Deicha Shabbos, has the ability to Deicha Shabbos directly, such as Mrs. Bezin. Same thing with burying a Meis Mitzvah. Uma Avodah She Deicha Shabbos. If we find that Karbonis are stronger than Shabbos, one can do malacha for Karbonis on Shabbos. Kvuras Meis Mitzvah Deicha Oisa. So Avodah, which is Deicha Shabbos, still Meis Mitzvah is higher than Avodah. You do aside with your avodah concerns, your kahuna concerns, and you do the meis mitzvah at the expense of avodah. We have a pasuk, Achaisa tells you that a kohen can become tummy from meis mitzvah, and therefore Shabbos, shenitchem pnei avodah, Shabbos which is pushed aside through avodah is done at the expense of Shabbos, which basically means that avodah stands higher than Shabbos. Einay din should take for us meis mitzvah deicha oisa, and therefore certainly the meis mitzvah, which is higher than avodah, which is higher than Shabbos, can be considered more prominent than Shabbos itself and push aside Shabbos. Go bury meis mitzvah on Shabbos. So you're trying to challenge my Kal V'Chomer using the meis mitzvah as an example of something which is stronger than avodah, but not stronger than Shabbos. So perhaps Mrs. Bezin, despite the fact that it stands higher than avodah, it shouldn't stand higher than Shabbos. No, maybe you're all wrong. Maybe meis mitzvah itself is Deicha Shabbos too. Because anything that pushes aside avodah, which is Deicha Shabbos, pushes aside Shabbos directly too. Meis mitzvah, Mrs. Bezin. So that's what we're holding. The Brisa continues, no. That's why we have a pasuk, Lo Yisevaru Eish. And that was the pshat we had. Moshe Seichem is alluding to Mrs. Bezin. It's not meant to be done on Shabbos. So bottom line is, the whole shakla v'tari, the whole discussion in the Brisa was Kal V'Chomer related, and nothing to do, unrelated to the concepts of asay deicha lo asay. So that can't provide any raya to what we're looking for. So we haven't really fulfilled our quest yet. Asks the Gemara, but just one more kasha. Before Rav Simon bar Ashi came along and told us about this Kal V'Chomer, we had figured that the Brisa was employing tools based on asay deicha lo asay, right? That was the thinking beforehand. According to our initial approach to the Brisa, the starting point was that asay can push aside a lo asay, and perhaps Mrs. Bezin can be a Shabbos, right? That was the masa matan in the Brisa. According to that approach, how are you going to explain these steps in the Brisa, the back and the forth and the back? Why was the Brisa challenging that notion? The Brisa meant like this. We'll just go a couple of more lines till the end of this discussion. The Brisa meant like this. You're telling me that Mrs. Bezin, Mrs. Asay can override Shabbos? And how do I apply Mechalel Meisumas, which indicates if one transgresses Shabbos, he gets Misa. One's not to Malach on Shabbos. B'shar Malachis, pertaining to ordinary Malachis. Chutz Mrs. Bezin, aside from Mrs. Bezin, but Bezin has a special power of Mrs. Bezin Dachi Shabbos. That is done on Shabbos as well, because the Asya Asay v'Dachi Lo Asay, because the Asay of Mrs. Bezin is stronger than the Lo Asay of Shabbos. So that was the starting point. Hadar Amar, the Brisa responds, no. Eima da Amrinan da Asya Asay v'Dachi Lo Asay. That's true, but when is it true? The Nasei stands more prominent than Lo Asay. That's by a plain Lo Asay. Lo Asay greater, such as Kalayim by Tzitzis. But in this case, it's Shabbos. Lo Asay Sheish by Kuros. a lav that entails kares, mishamas le'dachi. Why would you think it's deicha? How do you know it's deicha? Where are you coming from? Why would you suggest that it's deicha? That's the next step in the brisa. Here comes the following step. Hadur Amar. So the Tana responds, I'll tell you why I'm thinking as such. I'll tell you why I'm suggesting that an asay, a Mrs. Bezin, can push aside Shabbos with the Ikaros. Very simply. Otu asay deiches leis asay. Stop and think for a second. Why is it so that an asay can push aside an ordinary leis asay? When that happens, is that understandable? Is that logical? Lav leis asay chamer minei. Wouldn't you think that a lav is more strict than mitzvah asay? Look, the fact is, if one ignores an asay, doesn't get malchus. If one should ignore a leis asay, he gets malchus. Apparently, transgressing a lav is more severe than transgressing an asay. And still, the ka'aseh asay v'dachilei, an asay can push him aside. On the one hand, you say that being over a lav is more severe than being over an asay. Notwithstanding that fact, you're still telling me, when it comes to positive, when it comes to doing, what comes first? If you have a conflict between one and the other, the asay overrides. So apparently an asay can override even something which is more severe than him. The Ramban says, because asay is avos Hashem, etc., whatever the reason would be. If so, mali chumra zuta. What difference does it make whether it's just a low-level chumra, a low-level lav, umali chumra rabba, or a great chumrah, a great lav that contains a kares? What's the difference? Severity. Chumrah obviously plays no role here. An asay pushes aside a lav, despite the fact that the lav is more chumrah. So what's the difference whether he has a kares or not? That's where I'm coming from. It's not what's stuck. Is that so? Says the Brisa, that's why we need a pasuk, a special pasuk that over here it's different. I'm alayim sevaru to tell you, when it comes to Mrs. Bezin, this formula doesn't apply. But at the end of the day, we switch things around. Rav Simon Bar Ashi tells us, he enlightened us to the fact that it's not asay loisasay related. Not at all. It's a kal v'chomer related discussion. The Brisa's starting point was because we have a kal v'chomer to facilitate Mrs. Bezin b'Shabbos. And that being the case, we no longer have our marker that we're looking for. We have no discussion about asay pushing aside a lav with kares. Back to square one. So why did you assume otherwise? And why did you need a pasuk of alel that Yevamos is not applicable by a erva? Why would I even think that asay of Yevamos can push aside an erva with kares? So, we're back to the kasha, and Be'ez Hashem, there will be a teretz to be continued Be'ez Hashem tomorrow. All the best to you, much atzlacha.